What if I told you that the clothes you wear, the car you drive, and the wrinkles on your face determine how others treat you? That behind the polished smiles of high society lurks a cruel judgment waiting to be passed on those deemed unworthy? Imagine walking up to the doors of one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, your heart full of excitement for your birthday dinner, only to be stopped at the entrance. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't let you in. You don't fit our establishment's image." The words cut deeper than any knife, especially when you've lived a life of sacrifice, of giving everything to raise a child on your own. For Eleanor Williams, this humiliation was about to become her reality. The 68-year-old widow stood trembling at the entrance of Le Ciel, clutching her worn purse, her simple dress suddenly feeling inadequate under the doorman's disapproving gaze. What the staff didn't know was that their treatment of this seemingly ordinary elderly woman would trigger a chain of events that would leave them all speechless. Because sometimes the people we dismiss, the ones we deem insignificant based on appearances alone, hold secrets that can change everything in an instant. And Eleanor's secret, it arrived in exactly 17 minutes. What happens when those who judge based on wealth and status discover they've misjudged the one person they should have treated with respect? Stay with me, because justice doesn't always announce itself with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it arrives in a sleek black limousine, wearing a custom Italian suit, with the power to bring an entire establishment to its knees. Eleanor had spent weeks looking forward to this evening. Her 68th birthday wasn't just another year passing, it was a milestone. After her husband's death 12 years ago, she had raised their son alone, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything to give him opportunities she never had. Tonight was supposed to be special, a rare indulgence she had allowed herself after months of saving from her modest pension. Le Ciel wasn't just any restaurant. It was the crown jewel of the city's dining scene, a place where celebrities, politicians, and business moguls came to see and be seen. Reservations were nearly impossible to get, but Eleanor had managed to secure one 3 months in advance, carefully setting aside a little money each week to afford just one magical evening. She had arrived early, dressed in her best outfit, a simple blue dress she had purchased years ago for her son's college graduation, now carefully maintained and saved for special occasions. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and she wore the pearl earrings her late husband had given her on their 25th anniversary. In her weathered hands, she clutched a small purse containing her ID, her credit card with its carefully preserved credit limit, and a tube of lipstick she had applied in the taxi on the way over. "Excuse me," the maitre d' said, his voice dripping with practiced politeness that couldn't quite mask his disdain. "Do you perhaps have the wrong address?" His name was Philippe Moreau, and he had perfected the art of exclusion over 15 years at Le Ciel. "No," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I have a reservation, Eleanor Williams, for 7 o'clock. Philippe's eyes narrowed as he scanned the reservation list, his finger moving down the page with deliberate slowness. "Ah, yes, Williams." The pause that followed was calculated, designed to make her feel small. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," Eleanor echoed, confusion creeping into her voice. "Our establishment has certain standards," Philippe continued, his gaze drifting pointedly to her modest dress, her sensible shoes, the slight tremor in her hands that betrayed her age. "The reservation seems to have been made in error. We're fully booked tonight for our regular clientele." The emphasis on regular clientele wasn't subtle. Behind Philippe, Eleanor could see the restaurant's interior. The crystal chandeliers, the plush velvet seating, the gleaming silverware, and the people in designer clothes with expensive watches and perfect hair, people who belonged. "But I confirmed just yesterday," Eleanor protested, her voice smaller now. "It's my birthday." Philippe's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps the Olive Garden down the street would be more suitable for your celebration." He gestured to one of the security guards who had materialized beside him. "Marcel will help." "You find your way." The humiliation burned hot on Eleanor's cheeks. Around her, A small crowd had gathered. Other patrons waiting to be seated, staff members watching the scene unfold. Some looked away in discomfort, others with thinly veiled amusement. A young couple in matching designer outfits whispered to each other, the woman hiding a smirk behind her manicured hand. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice entered the conversation. Eleanor turned to see a woman in an impeccable black dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Vivienne Dupont, the restaurant's manager, had a reputation for maintaining Le Ciel's exclusive atmosphere at all costs. "This lady seems to believe she has a reservation," Philippe explained, the word lady carrying a weight of insincerity. Vivienne's gaze swept over Eleanor, taking in every detail, every flaw, every sign that she didn't belong in their world. "I see. Well, we can't have just anyone walking in off the street, can we? It would diminish the experience for our valued guests." The words cut deep, each one a precise incision designed to wound without leaving visible scars. Eleanor felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to spill. She thought of all the nights she had gone to bed hungry so her son could have a proper meal, all the extra shifts she had worked to pay for his education, all the dreams she had deferred so his could take flight. "Please," she said quietly. "Dignity, fighting against humiliation. I've been planning this for months." Vivienne's smile was cold efficiency personified. "Security will escort you out. And please, don't attempt to make another reservation. We keep records of incidents." As Marcel's hand closed around her elbow, firm but not quite rough enough to be called assault, Eleanor felt something inside her crumble. Not just the excitement of her birthday dinner, but a piece of her self-worth, chipped away by the casual cruelty of those who judged her worth by the fabric of her dress rather than the fabric of her character. What they couldn't see, what they didn't bother to look for, was the strength that had carried her through widowhood, through poverty, through sacrifice. They couldn't see the woman who had raised a son alone, who had taught him values that no amount of money could buy. They couldn't see beyond the wrinkles and the modest clothes to the dignity and resilience beneath. As she was led toward the door, Eleanor's shoulders slumped in defeat. The eyes of the other patrons followed her, some with pity, others with the relief that comes from witnessing someone else's humiliation rather than experiencing it yourself. In that moment, she wasn't Eleanor Williams, a woman with a lifetime of love and sacrifice behind her. She was just an old woman who didn't belong. What none of them knew was that their actions that night would set in motion a reckoning none of them could have anticipated. Because Eleanor Williams might have been judged unworthy by their standards, but there was someone else in her life who operated by a very different set of rules. Someone who was about to teach them all a lesson in respect they would never forget. The cool evening air hit Eleanor like a slap as she stumbled onto the sidewalk outside Le Ciel. Marcel, the security guard, had at least had the decency to mumble a half-hearted, "Sorry, ma'am," before returning to his post. Now she stood alone, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from inside the restaurant, a cruel reminder of the celebration she'd been denied. For a moment, Eleanor simply stood there, her legs trembling beneath her, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. A young couple walked past, dressed impeccably, the woman's diamond earrings catching the light from the restaurant's elegant facade. They barely glanced at Eleanor as they approached the entrance, where Philippe greeted them with the warm smile he had withheld from her just minutes before. "Right this way, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. Your usual table is waiting." The contrast was stark, painful. Eleanor felt invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of a world that had no place for her. She had spent her entire life believing that dignity and hard work were what mattered, that character transcended appearance. Now, on her 68th birthday, that belief lay shattered at her feet, like fine china. Eleanor made her way to a bench, across the street, her legs finally giving out as she sank onto the cold metal. From here, she could see the restaurant in all its glory. The valet parking attendants rushing to take keys from luxury cars, The flash of cameras as someone recognizable arrived. The golden glow of exclusivity that seemed to surround the entire establishment. "Happy birthday to me," she whispered, her voice catching on the words. A tear slipped down her cheek, then another, until they fell freely. 68 years of dignity temporarily abandoned in the face of such public humiliation. It wasn't just about being denied entry to a fancy restaurant. It was about being deemed unworthy based on nothing more than appearance. It was about a lifetime of being overlooked, underestimated, pushed aside. It was about a society that valued designer labels over the calluses of hard work, that respected bank accounts more than the character of those who stood before them. As Eleanor sat there, memories flooded back, of scrubbing floors in other people's homes to pay for her son's school supplies, of mending the same clothes over and over because new ones weren't in the budget, of the pride she'd felt watching her boy graduate from college, the first in their family to do so. She had given everything, sacrificed everything, and what did she have to show for it? A lonely bench on her birthday and the sting of rejection. Her phone buzzed in her purse, pulling her from her thoughts. With shaking hands, she retrieved it, seeing her son's name on the screen. "Mom, where are you? I thought we were meeting at Le Ciel at 7. Eleanor froze. She had told Michael about her reservation weeks ago, but he had been so busy with work lately that she hadn't expected him to remember, let alone join her. The thought of telling him what had just happened, of admitting how they had treated her, filled her with a fresh wave of shame. I'm outside, she managed, trying to keep her voice steady. Outside? Why aren't you inside? It's freezing out there. They wouldn't let me in, she whispered, the words painful to speak aloud. They said I wasn't suitable. The silence that followed was so complete that Eleanor wondered if the call had dropped. Then she heard it, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a tone she had rarely heard from her gentle, patient son. "What did you just say?" His voice was low, controlled, but with an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. "It's fine, Michael. I'll just go home. We can celebrate another time." "No, Mom, it is not fine." Each word was precise, measured. "Stay exactly where you are. I'm 3 minutes away." The call ended, and Eleanor sat back on the bench, confused, by the steel she had heard in her son's voice. Michael had always been kind, soft-spoken, the type to avoid confrontation at all costs. The man she had just spoken to sounded different, resolute, commanding, almost dangerous. Across the street, the scene at Le Ciel continued unchanged. Philippe was turning away another older couple, his dismissive gesture now familiar to Eleanor. Vivian stood in the doorway, surveying her domain with cold satisfaction. They were untouchable in their world of privilege and exclusivity, secure in their power to decide who was worthy and who was not. Or so they thought. A sleek black limousine turned the corner, moving with deliberate slowness down the street. Eleanor watched it approach, noting how other vehicles seemed to instinctively move out of its way. It pulled up directly in front of Le Ciel, its polished surface reflecting the restaurant's lights like a mirror. The driver, dressed in an immaculate uniform, emerged and opened the rear door with practiced precision. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as a tall figure stepped out. Even from across the street, she recognized her son's silhouette. But there was something different about him. The way he stood, the way the staff suddenly snapped to attention, the way conversations stopped as heads turned toward him. This wasn't the boy she had raised on a housekeeper's salary. This was someone else entirely. As Michael straightened his custom suit and buttoned his jacket, his gaze swept the area until it locked onto Eleanor. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, something passed between them. An understanding, a promise. Then Michael turned toward the restaurant, his expression hardening into something Eleanor had never seen before. The power was about to shift, and no one inside Le Ciel had any idea what was coming. The limousine door closed with a soft click as Michael Williams straightened his Italian suit and surveyed the scene before him. At 42, He carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone who had conquered worlds far beyond his humble beginnings. His eyes, so much like his mother's, scanned the restaurant entrance where Philippe and Vivienne still stood, unaware that their evening was about to take a dramatic turn. Michael's jaw tightened as he spotted his mother sitting alone on the bench across the street, her shoulders slumped into defeat. The sight ignited something primal within him, a protective fury he hadn't felt since his days as a young Marine in combat. Before joining the culinary world and becoming one of the most celebrated executive chefs in Los Angeles, Michael had served his country, learning discipline and leadership that would later define his meteoric rise in the restaurant industry. "Mr. Williams!" The valet's eyes widened in recognition as Michael approached. "It's an honor, sir. We weren't expecting you tonight." Michael nodded curtly, his focus entirely on the entrance where Philippe was now greeting another wealthy couple with the same obsequious smile he had denied Eleanor. "Is Alan Tutzer still the manager here?" Michael asked, his voice deceptively calm. "No, sir. Miss Dupont has been running Le Ciel for the past 3 years." "I see." Michael's expression revealed nothing as he walked toward the entrance, each step measured and deliberate. The reaction was immediate. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A waiter nearly dropped a tray of champagne flutes. Philippe's practiced smile froze on his face as recognition dawned. "Chef Williams," he stammered, suddenly pale. We weren't expecting. Do you have a reservation?" Michael's gaze was glacial. "I believe my mother did." "Eleanor Williams." "For 7 o'clock?" The color drained from Philippe's face as the pieces fell into place. Behind him, Vivienne stepped forward, her professional mask firmly in place despite the sudden tension. "Chef Williams, what an unexpected pleasure. We would be delighted to accommodate you. If you'll follow me, I'm not here to dine." Michael cut her off, his voice carrying just enough to ensure that nearby patrons could hear. "I'm here because you turned away my mother, the woman who raised me alone after my father died, the woman who worked 3 jobs so I could attend culinary school, the woman who taught me everything I know about dignity and respect, qualities that are evidently in short supply here." Vivienne's smile faltered. "There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Michael said, his voice dangerously soft. "You judged her by her appearance, decided she wasn't suitable for your establishment, made her feel worthless on her 68th birthday. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped as every eye in the vicinity turned toward the confrontation unfolding at the entrance. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," Vivienne suggested, acutely aware of the audience they now had. "Why? Were you concerned about privacy when you humiliated my mother in front of your patrons? When you had security escort her out like she was trespassing?" Philippe stepped forward, desperation evident in his voice. "Chef Williams, had we known she was your mother—" "That's exactly the problem," Michael interrupted, his voice rising with controlled anger. "It shouldn't matter whose mother she is. She's a human being, deserving of basic respect." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Several diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly finding their expensive meals less appetizing. "What you don't know," Michael continued, addressing not just Vivienne and Philippe, but the entire restaurant, "is that before becoming executive chef at Nora in West Hollywood, before opening Margot's in Culver City, before earning my reputation, in this industry I was a Marine who served in Iraq." He paused, letting the information sink in. "I learned there that true worth isn't measured by the clothes you wear or the car you drive. It's measured by character, by dignity, by how you treat others when there's nothing to gain." Vivienne's composure was cracking. "Chef Williams, please." "I also learned," Michael continued as if she hadn't spoken, "about power. Who really has it? Who only thinks they do?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "I have the CEOs of 3 major restaurant groups on speed dial. People who are planning to invest in your upcoming expansion. People who now might be interested to hear how Le Ciel treats its guests." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Vivienne's face had gone from pale to ashen. Additionally, Michael said, his voice now deadly quiet. I have over 2 million followers on social media, people who trust my recommendations about where to dine, people who might be interested in hearing this story. A woman at a nearby table quietly closed her menu and signaled for the check. Then another. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that it was almost palpable. Chef Williams, Vivian said, her voice now trembling slightly. We sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. Of course your mother is welcome here. We would be honored to serve her. Michael's laugh was without humor. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about getting a table now. This is about the fact that you shouldn't treat anyone the way you treated her, regardless of who they are or who they know. He turned to address the dining room at large. I want everyone here to look at what just happened. A woman was deemed unworthy based solely on her appearance. Then, suddenly, when her son turns out to have influence, the red carpet appears. Is that the kind of establishment you want to support with your hard-earned money? Several diners were now openly gathering their belongings, the evening's elegant atmosphere thoroughly shattered. Michael turned back to Vivian, whose carefully constructed world of exclusivity was crumbling before her eyes. My mother taught me that true class has nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treat others. It seems that's a lesson you still need to learn. He buttoned his jacket and straightened his shoulders. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to take my mother to a restaurant that understands what hospitality really means. And tomorrow, I'll be making some calls. As Michael turned to leave, Philippe made one last desperate attempt. Please, Chef Williams, what can we do to make this right? Michael paused, looking back over his shoulder. You can start by remembering that every person who walks through that door is someone's parent, someone's child, someone who deserves respect, regardless of what they're wearing or how much money they have. With that, he walked out of Le Ciel, leaving behind a restaurant in disarray and a management team facing the consequences of their actions. As he crossed the street toward his mother, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The lessons his mother had taught him about dignity, about respect, about standing up for what's right, had never been more clear. Eleanor looked up as he approached, confusion and concern etched on her face. Michael, what happened in there? Everyone's leaving. Michael smiled, extending his hand to help her up from the bench. Let's just say they've had a change of heart about their reservation policy. But I know a much better place for your birthday dinner anyway. As they walked toward the limousine, Eleanor glanced back at Le Ciel, where Vivian stood in the doorway, watching them go with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Did you do something? Eleanor asked, her voice small but curious. Michael squeezed her hand gently. I just reminded them of something you taught me long ago, that true worth isn't about what you have, but who you are. As the limousine pulled away from the curb, neither of them looked back at the restaurant where the evening's carefully maintained illusion of exclusivity had been shattered by a simple truth. That dignity and respect should never be conditional on status or appearance. The following days unfolded like a masterfully orchestrated symphony of justice, each movement building upon the last to create a crescendo of consequences for Le Ciel and its management. By noon, the day after Eleanor's birthday, Michael's social media post detailing the incident had gone viral. The story resonated deeply, touching a nerve in a society increasingly aware of issues surrounding ageism, classism, and the often toxic culture of exclusivity. Thousands shared their own experiences of discrimination, creating a tidal wave of public outrage that crashed against Le Ciel's carefully cultivated image. Vivienne Dupont arrived at the restaurant that morning to find a small crowd of protesters outside, holding signs with slogans like "Respect has no dress code" and "Dignity over diamonds." Local news vans lined the street, reporters eager to capture the unfolding drama. Inside, the phone rang incessantly with cancellations and media inquiries. By mid-afternoon, the first of Michael's promised calls had materialized into action. The CEO of a major restaurant group publicly announced they were pulling out of their investment in Le Ciel's expansion plans, citing concerns about the establishment's values aligning with their own. 2 more investors followed suit before the day was out, leaving Le Ciel's ambitious growth strategy in tatters. Philippe, the maitre d' who had first turned Eleanor away, found himself at the center of a social media storm. His face, captured, clearly in security footage that had somehow leaked online, became the symbol of the restaurant's callous treatment. By evening, he had tendered his resignation, his career in high-end hospitality effectively over. But it wasn't just Le Ciel feeling the heat. The incident sparked a broader conversation about how society treats its elders and those deemed unworthy based on appearances. Other upscale establishments across the city began hastily reviewing their policies, suddenly aware that their practices might be the next to come under scrutiny. A week after the incident, Vivienne Dupont sat in her office, staring at the latest financial reports. Reservations had plummeted, and even their regular clientele was staying away, wary of being associated with the scandal. The restaurant that had once been the crown jewel of the city's dining scene was now hemorrhaging money. A soft knock at the door interrupted her gloomy contemplation. It was Alan Tutzer, the former manager who had been unceremoniously replaced by Vivienne 3 years ago in her quest to make Le Ciel even more exclusive. "The board asked me to step in temporarily," he explained, his expression a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "They think a change in leadership might help salvage the situation." Vivienne nodded numbly, understanding the implicit message. Her reign at Le Ciel was over, undone by a single act of cruelty that had exposed the hollow core of her philosophy. As she packed up her personal belongings, a final indignity awaited her at the restaurant's entrance. Eleanor Williams stood there, not alone this time, but surrounded by a group of elderly individuals, all dressed in their Sunday best. "Ms. Dupont," Eleanor said, her voice strong and clear. "We're here for our reservation." Vivienne blinked in confusion. "Reservation?" Alan stepped forward, a gentle smile on his face. "Yes, I've arranged for Ms. Williams and her friends from the local senior centre to have dinner here tonight. On the house, of course. It's part of our new community outreach program." The irony wasn't lost on Vivienne. The woman she had deemed unworthy was now being welcomed with open arms, while she, herself, was being shown the door. As she walked past the group, head bowed, Eleanor's voice stopped her. "Ms. Dupont," Eleanor said softly, "I don't take pleasure in your misfortune. That's not what this was about. I hope you understand that now." Vivienne turned, meeting Eleanor's gaze. In those eyes, she saw not triumph or gloating, but a quiet dignity that had been there all along, a dignity she had been too blind to see. "I do understand," Vivienne replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I'm truly sorry." As Vivienne walked away from Le Ciel for the last time, she carried with her a lesson far more valuable than any profit margin or exclusive clientele list. She had learned at great cost that true worth cannot be measured by designer labels or bank accounts, but by the content of one's character and the kindness in one's heart. Inside the restaurant, Eleanor and her friends were seated at the best table in the house. As they perused the menus, chatting and laughing, the other diners couldn't help but smile at the joy radiating from the group. It was a stark contrast to the cold exclusivity that had once defined Le Ciel. Michael, watching from a discreet corner, felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had used his influence not for vengeance, but to create change, to remind people of the values his mother had instilled in him. As he watched Eleanor raise a toast to her friends, her eyes sparkling with happiness, he knew that this was the true victory. In the end, it wasn't about punishing those who had wronged them. It was about creating a world where people like his mother, people who had spent their lives giving, sacrificing and loving, were treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. A world where worth was measured not by the clothes on your back, but by the kindness in your heart. As the evening wore on and laughter filled the once stuffy air of Le Ciel, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted, not just in this restaurant, but in the hearts and minds of all who heard the story. It was a reminder that sometimes The most powerful form of justice isn't revenge, but transformation, the kind that ripples outward, changing not just individuals, but entire communities. And it all started with one woman, deemed unworthy by some, but whose true value had always been beyond measure.